You're listening to Intentionally Catholic, a podcast about living our Catholic faith with joy and intention.
Welcome back to Intentionally Catholic. I'm Dan Hansen.
I'm Father Ron Hutchinson.
Now today, Father, we're going to dig into a topic. It's at the heart of Catholic tradition, but sometimes I think gets overlooked in our day-to-day lives, the saints. We all know about the big names, St. Francis, St. Therese, St. Augustine. But
St. Peter.
St. Peter, right. I was going to make a joke about St. Dan, but we'll wait and see see how that shakes out. How do the saints impact our daily lives? That's what I want to talk about. And to get us moving, let's just start with the basics. Who are the saints and what actually makes someone a saint in the church? And then I want to get to some of, your favorite saints and all of that. So, but the saints, what makes them technically a saint?
Well, saints, by the very definition, are individuals who have been perceived or have been viewed as holy in their lifetimes. Okay, so they're individuals who, by the way they lived their life, lived it in conjunction with God, lived it very connected to God, and that showed in their actions and their lives, etc. There's a whole process for how saints are, named in the church, and I won't get into that today because that's a whole another thing, but that would be another 30-minute discussion is what I'm saying. But literally, they are people who were recognized for their holiness during their lifetimes.
All right. So patron saints, talk about that just briefly. How are they assigned to different causes?
Yeah, interestingly enough, it's always kind of bizarre how sometimes I'm always shocked by who is a saint is a patron of X, Y, or Z. It's interesting. Like St. Michael, the archangel, is the patron of police officers, military people, firemen, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, like St. Lawrence, the deacon who was grilled, is actually strangely the patron saint of cooks and grill masters and stuff like that. So some of them sometimes are a little creepy weird.
How did that happen?
I don't know how it happens.
I need to know these things. That is great.
Yeah, it's just some of them and it's what is the other Santa Lucia, who had her eyes plucked out, as the patron saint of optometrists and opticians. And
see, God's got a sense of humor.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of interesting.
They are laughing about that all the time up there.
Yeah, it's just, when you read some of them, you're like, and they fit with their life stories sometimes, or things that happen in their lives. So yeah, it's a little, it can seem a little strange at times, or just something slightly comical that you go, okay, well, that fits,
It was definitely weird for me coming from a Protestant background.
Yeah.
Because some of them, like you said, some of them I did not know about the grill guy. Saint who again? Lawrence?
St. Lawrence, the deacon, yeah.
What is our deacon's name?
Lawrence.
Yeah, okay. I thought so.
And he likes to grill.
Well, I wonder whose patron saint is. It was very strange to me running into some of these stories, and some of them were so holy, and you could get it. And it was very, wow. And then I'd stumble into some of these other ones. So yeah, it is very interesting. Someday I'm going to dig into all of that. How about your personal favorite? Do you have a favorite saint?
Well, I do have a lot of saints, or several saints that I'm particularly fond of. But today, by the way, as we're doing this podcast, putting it together, it's St. Valentine Day. And it's really interesting because there's very little known about St. Valentine, okay? The only thing we know is that he was a priest of Rome, and that it's interesting as a priest that he was named the patron saint of love or lovers. And it's kind of funny because I jokingly said today, of all people that you would choose to be the patron saint of love or lovers, you wouldn't be a priest. I mean, gosh, we know nothing about love, and we've never been in love. And, we're
all kind of grizzly.
So how would we get this whole idea of love? And, we're all, grizzled non-lovers of anything. No, that's not true. But it's interesting that, I was joking that at Mass this morning with people. But yeah, one of my other favorite patrons is St. Gregory the Great. St. Gregory the Great did several things that he formalized the liturgy, codified it, and brought everybody together doing Mass one particular way, so that it no longer was like if you were over here it was done this way, and if you're over here it was done that way. So it became the Roman Catholic Church's liturgy. Okay. The other thing is he was very he is known for having supported the church's effort to create chant. Gregorian chant is named for him, and he encouraged it at the time of his papacy. So, we now still have Gregorian chant that's used during liturgy, and it's a way that we, use singing and saying prayers together. And so as a musician, as a singer, I always found myself fond of him. Actually, Gregory the Great is also my confirmation saint. He was the name I chose for confirmation. So, he's my patron in a sense. I've created him as my personal patron.
All right. Do you have other patrons? Do we only ever have one patron?
No, interestingly enough, I have a strong devotion. I have a deep devotion to St. John Vianney, who is the patron of priests, interestingly enough. But I've always had he's somebody that, granted, not all of his life can I appreciate or want to emulate, but he was a good and faithful priest who, interestingly enough, wasn't very smart. He wasn't thought of highly by his teachers and professors. And interestingly enough, if I remember correctly, I think that he, for a period of time, was a simplex priest, which they did at that time. They would only allow them to do either hear confessions or just say Mass, but they didn't have all the faculties of a priest. Okay. So he's very well known as a confessor. Doesn't mean that, he was, a lot of people say, oh, that means he, just was so kind to people when he was sitting in the reconciliation in the confessional. And interesting enough, he was very confrontational. He challenged people greatly. But by the time that he was in his elderly years, people literally there was a train station from Paris to where he was. So because that many people were going, there was a train that went back and forth because there were that many people going to him for confession. And not because he was easy on them. He was easy on them.
I think, isn't that the case with Padre Pio as well?
Yeah.
I think he's well known. I mean, people would flock to him for confessions, but
he wasn't always, so to speak,
brutal.
Nice.
Right.
Yeah, he could be very brutal. Yeah.
Well, but you get what you need sometime. I remember one particular confession that I went to that it was the first time anybody ever kind of let me have it a little bit. And it was a complete surprise. And it was exactly what I needed. I left thinking that was just perfect because he wasn't mean, but it was something where I was challenged rather than God's mercy, and which was great. He ended with that, but he said, okay, let's talk a minute.
Yeah. It's interesting. I vacillate between, kind of the two, I don't want to say extremes, but, there's many times that I find myself being like, okay, today, I don't know why, but it'll well up in me. And it's like, I can't let this go. I can't take this anymore. And so I tend to I'm sure it sounds harsh, but it's coming from a place of love. But where I find myself getting a little bit, as a confessor, a little bit disgruntled is when someone, they kind of lash out at me after I've given them what is not, it isn't the, God loves that you're trying, kind of attitude, well, sometimes trying isn't enough. No, sometimes you have to do more than try.
Gotta have some progress. And that's what I ran into. And my confessor at that point, he was an old, I don't think he's with us anymore, older priest. And his patience was done. He was done.
Sometimes I will admit my patience can get that way with people who are coming to me over and over and over again. And I'm like, okay, we're not making any progress.
Yeah. No,
so, me being Mr. Nice Guy is not going to work.
Not working. And that's why I think it worked with all these other ones. Like you said, I mean, we've got track records. We know they didn't pull any punches sometimes, and people still flocked to them because spiritual growth happened in that.
And it's interesting. Many of the saints throughout history that we're describing qualities that they often exhibited. They didn't just, say to people, oh, it's just God is love, God is love, God is love. They were many times really challenging people about living their lives and how to live their lives. I mean, let's look at some of the classic saints that people think of, like St. Francis of Assisi. I mean, granted, a lot of Catholics will be like, oh, yeah, he's the patron saint of pet owners and he loved animals. And I don't know where all that came from, by the way. But nonetheless, some of it may be that supposedly, birds would come sit on his shoulder and wolves, would be at his feet or, like dogs, But interesting enough, St. Francis was very challenging to people about, living their lives in a way that wasn't about comfort and wasn't about, having everything and being much more generous. And so, and you look at the saint, I think many of the saints today challenge us, especially in Western culture, where despite the fact we think we have nothing, we have so much, they challenge us in that idea of letting go of things, not being so attached to things. If you look at St. Teresa of Lisieux or St. Therese, all of them, they lived real poverty in a sense, the poverty of spirit, poverty of things. Many times they were literally very ill and still like doing these great acts of mortifying their flesh and, that kind of thing. So I think saints today can speak to us needing to recognize like there's a lot we could learn from them. There's a lot we could put into practice in our own lives.
Yeah, they're not just people from the past that, those are quaint little stories or whatever. They actually apply to the things we're living through right now. So how do you think anybody out there, we talked about patron saints, or you talked about saints that you have, a connection to or devotion to, however you want to explain that. I'm assuming, of course, the answer is yes. But do you think everybody out there can find a saint to relate to?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I don't think it'd be hard. You could start by just looking for the patron of the type of work you do, or you start there. Or, I think that sometimes reading, Lives of the Saints day by day, can be a way of, finding a saint that you can really, hang on to, that one that speaks to your heart, speaks to your life. I think it's interesting that, the other thing about saints is they're like our family. They're our family in faith that are always praying for us. They're interceding for us in heaven. That's one of the reasons we call them saints. We believe they're in heaven with God already. And they're constantly praying for us. And so there's this, huge, choir, huge congregation of saints that is concerned about us, and the veil between us and them is fairly thin, so we ask for their intercession and they are interceding for us. So I think that that's one of the reasons that I always like the idea of saints. Granted, Catholics, we love statues, pictures, stuff like that help us to remember that this journey isn't something only we're doing. This journey is something others have done, and others have done it successfully. And
they care about how we're doing it.
Yes, exactly.
Is it Hebrews where Paul, or I guess we don't know technically who wrote Hebrews, but the crowd of witnesses, right? The cloud of witnesses that are watching, and almost like cheering us on as we go. And I remember, when I was Protestant, that wasn't. We knew about that passage. I don't really know I can't remember what I thought about that passage, how I dealt with that passage, because as I started this Catholic thing, I did run into a lot of Protestant friends and family who would talk about how the saints, that's just really offensive, because the people in heaven, they don't know what's going on down here. They're in heaven. They're just hanging out. They're having a great time. That's what we grew up believing, they're disconnected from us. And yet that was one of the most powerful things for me. I remember the day where, that light bulb went off in my head, and I realized the power of thinking that Peter, Paul, all these people, Mary, and saints through all the generations literally are aware of what I'm dealing with right now, and not just aware of it, but they're cheering me on. They want me to succeed. They're praying for my success and in holiness and all of that. And you feel so connected to this deep history, this rich history that it bridges all of time. It feels like, all of a sudden I am connected to these people that I've only ever read about. And that was incredibly powerful.
Yeah. It's one of the reasons that, yes, we as Catholics have a long tradition of asking for the prayers of a saint, asking for their intercession. So specifically on their feast days, but at other times as well, if they're our patron and we feel a connection to them. So, we ask them for strength, ask them to pray for strength for us, and they can't grant us anything. They can only ask God to give it to us. But saints have there are a lot of feast days practically almost every day of the year. Now, some saints are only regional, so they only show up in certain regions of the world because they have never become part of the universal calendar of the church. Other saints have become part of the universal calendar of the church, and we celebrate their memorials or their feasts throughout the whole church. So, but yeah, I think it's the other thing we can do with saints is, there are many saints that wrote a lot. They wrote a lot of things. And so we can read their writings. We can find compendiums of, the writings of St. Francis Xavier or the writings of St. Thomas Aquinas or, the writings of St. Catherine of Siena. I can go on, and that makes up volumes, like literally volumes of writings that it's interesting because what I tend to find is sometimes when I read them, my initial response is like, oh, that's like such a strange way to talk about God. They talk about God in different ways than we probably do today, or the language is much more flowery or something. But at other times when I stop and think about it, I'm like, wow, that's an interesting thought they had, or that's an interesting approach. It's one of the reasons I love the Office of Readings that's part of the liturgy, the hours that priests and religious use, because there's always a reading from scripture, and then there's a reading from usually a saint or, some spiritual father in history, that kind of thing. And so it's funny how sometimes I'll be like, wow, what that person said today, that was just what I needed today, and it's just strange. So yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why we go to the saints, is because we can learn from them. We can grow in our own holiness from how they grew and from their own words.
Honestly, it doesn't need to be belabored, but, I love baseball, always loved baseball since I was little. So, of course, I'm watching Johnny Bench and all these characters, the professionals, the people who've made it. I want to hear what they did. How did you train? What did you do? How do you scoop that ground ball up without, So I'm watching Ozzie Smith and how he does it. Well, you go to the experts. This is no different. In fact, it is different because it's so much more important. Like we said at the beginning, the saints, when they're declared a saint, the concept is they're in heaven. They've made it. They've run the race, completed the race, and won it.
And they've gotten the prize, yeah.
And if anybody can help us get to that point, human-wise, we can seek them out, ask for their intercession, read from, all the writings, all the things that they went through, all the practices they did. What can we incorporate that will help us?
Yeah, we watch cooking shows because we want to learn from chefs. It's the same with the saints.
I wonder if that St. Lawrence watched cooking shows.
Well, they didn't have them at that time. So,
no, but maybe they had something like that. And I wonder if you found that ironic. Anyway, one last question I do have, and it's probably really dumb, and I'm only asking it because I have wondered for so long. So, and you touched on it, but I want to bring back to it. some of these stories, so I'm digging into saints. I've got a number of different books at home about the saints, lives of the saints. I've wanted to do an entire podcast on my own where I research one saint because there's so many saints. Why don't we come up with a 5-minute history of this? Well, some of these histories are so, honestly, for lack of a better phrase, unbelievable, a lack of a better word. I don't understand what I'm even reading. How do people believe that this really happened? What's going on there? Is that just tradition leaning in?
Yeah, I think we have to be careful because some saints, definitely what we know about them it's fact-based. Their lives are, so to speak, were an open book, and and what was written about them is the veritable truth, very based on veritas, truth. Other saints we refer to as hagiography. It's kind of tradition that's gotten built up around that saint. Some of it's probably a little embellished. Some of it is a little, out of the norm of real belief that you like. Really, I mean, maybe not. Or I think we have to sometimes take certain saints' lives with a little, or what we can read about them with a grain of salt.
So the church isn't putting a stamp of this is
every
what it
aspect
is.
of their lives is entirely like, because some of the saints were made saints long time ago or were being revered, but their actual lives we know very little about, like St. Valentine. St. Valentine, the only thing known about him, he was a priest of Rome. That's about all that's known about him. But for some reason, he became somebody that I think he might have been a martyr, maybe. And so martyrs automatically are considered saints. So, but nothing is known about his life. So, what little bit sort of may be attached to him is probably mostly hagiography. We have to be careful because, there's certain saints that, it's been embellished. Let's put it that way. It's been embellished.
We can read about bilocation.
Yeah, bilocation.
Stigmata.
Stigmata. Usually, if they had stigmata, that's a known fact. Yeah, verified. It's very interesting because it was like me saying that birds would land on. Or that St. Francis would talk to birds and animals. And, I think he just had a great appreciation for nature. Yes, he did refer to, certain animals as brother or sister, but it was his way of recognizing he was connected. We were all interconnected. Everything was interconnected. We talk about that today. I mean, we recognize our interconnectedness to everything. What I do has an effect on everything, so it isn't just affecting me. So, I think we have to take a little bit with a grain of salt. And others we can read and say, I can. This is history. This is a biography. Some of them are not biographies, depending on what time frame.
Well, right. Because, I mean, I guess I knew all of that. It's just, it is what I did.
So some of them are more tradition.
That's what I was really, and the church doesn't say, hey, look, this is what it is.
Yeah, you have to believe
12
everything
places at once.
Exactly.
That's not what's going on. This is just stories that happen. I get that. So somebody listening out there right now, we probably, I guess we don't know. I don't know who's all listening. If they don't have a relationship with a saint, that's something that's completely strange to them. What's one simple thing they can do to just start building that connection?
I think I would, Google patron saint of whatever you want to be a patron saint. Maybe it's your career or a hobby, and start there, because that person is probably a patron saint of that aspect or that thing or that job or whatever for a certain reason, and find out why.
All right. I'm going to dig into that, and I'm going to look into the grilling one because, man, that sounds, I really like that. That's the one that stuck with me.
You got too hooked on that.
I did. Well, mainly because we have our own Deacon Lawrence who likes grilling. It's too funny.
Exactly.
Anyway, that's going to do it for this episode. Thanks for listening. If you do have any comments, questions, topics that you'd like us to discuss, email your thoughts to comments@iCatholic.show. Thanks for listening, everybody. For Intentionally Catholic, I'm Dan Hansen.
I'm Father Ron Hutchinson. God bless.
Thanks for listening to Intentionally Catholic. If you like what you heard, please consider sharing our show with a friend. If you have comments, questions, or topics you'd like to hear discussed, please email those to comments@icatholic.show, and be sure to tune in next time for another episode.